Purple Warriors podcast. I'm your host, Ali Sugars, and thank you for joining us. This podcast is about raising awareness for domestic and family abuse by allowing survivors to share their own journeys to recovery. You will find practical yet powerful information and tools that you can immediately implement into your own journey to recovery. You will also hear information on how you can help someone you suspect may be in a toxic relationship. To support this podcast and get access to amazing bonus content, click Become a Patron for more information. If you have a story to share, reach out to me, Ali F. Sugars, on Facebook, YouTube and Instagram. Hosts and guests will often discuss sensitive topics in detail. While this is done with the utmost respect and dignity, this may cause triggers for some listeners. Hello everyone, welcome to today's episode of the Purple Warriors podcast, and this is a very, very important episode and what I believe is probably one of the most important episodes that we have had so far. We are going to talk about living with domestic violence and what you can do in a potential lockdown situation. So today's guest is Kelly Barrett, who works at Women's Safety Services South Australia as the Learning and Education Coordinator. So welcome today, Kelly, and thank you for coming on at such short notice.
Thank you for having me.
It's going to be an interesting conversation that we are going to have today, no doubt.
Absolutely.
So tell us, Kelly, what does your position involve at Women's Safety Services SA?
So as you said, I'm the Learning and Education Coordinator. So my job is to coordinate all the learning around how workers might recognise and respond to domestic and family violence. So I would develop and deliver training to staff within Women's Safety Services about doing their job, but I would also deliver training to other professionals about who might come in contact with people who might be experiencing domestic and family violence. So helping them to be able to support the families that they support.
Excellent.
So that's my main role within the organisation.
Fantastic. So obviously a very apt person to be talking to today.
So before doing the learning and education, I did a lot of frontline work. So for the last 20 years, I've worked in frontline services, so doing crisis work with domestic violence specialist services, early on doing therapeutic work. So I sort of had a long history in the domestic and family violence field. And so now I can kind of apply my knowledge in a bit of a different role.
So you've had an opportunity to kind of do it all round, haven't you? So that's fantastic. All right, so let's get into, without any more hesitation, a bit of the meat of the conversation. So as I said, this is kind of a conversation that I feel has to be had, and particularly in the sense now that I think my personal opinion is that shortly we may be in a lockdown situation or quarantine situation is probably a better word to use. Is there some way that a person living in a domestic violence situation can protect themselves during a quarantine without aggravating their abuser? Is that possible?
Yeah. Well, look, I think that's a really interesting question. I think it's worth unpacking that question a little bit, because I guess what we want to be really clear about is that for someone experiencing abuse, they are no way responsible for keeping themselves safe or for managing their partner's moods or behaviour. Like that's just something that can't be done. So it's definitely not the case, like if someone does this, then suddenly they'll be safe and their partner won't hurt them or abuse them. Like that's, it's really the complete opposite. So when someone is being abused, it's usually their partner who is perpetrating a range of tactics to maintain power and control. So that person who's experiencing the abuse, their kind of space for action is really, really limited. Through the actions of the perpetrator. So I think we have to be really clear about that from the start, that that someone can't be held responsible for the actions of their partner. However, at Women's Safety Services, we're really clear as well that safety is really important, and that people can think about certain things they might be able to do in a situation that might mitigate risk or might help them stay safe, but that we also understand that that can be pretty tricky, particularly if you're in a really frightening situation where your kind of fight, flight, freeze response kind of gets triggered, and we just do what we can do to survive. Like often our more kind of planning brain is switched off and our more survival brain takes over. So sometimes people find even if they have put some plans in place, it's hard to sort of remember them or access them. So it's really important if someone is planning around their safety to keep it really simple and clear, because it's kind of hard to remember. But yeah, there's definitely things people can do, but it's really, it depends on a person's situation. So every person's situation is really unique. So there's no kind of one universal plan, like if you do this, then this will help, because people are really negotiating really complex situations, and it will be different for everyone.
Yeah, I agree. And I have to say I was very, very careful in the way I worded that question, because of what you said at first. It is not, it's not that person's fault. Like,
no,
they're not responsible.
So when we think about if people are thinking about their safety, there's some really kind of three kind of simple things people can think about and kind of ask themselves. The first is sort of, well, what they've already been doing. So ask themselves, well, what do I already do to keep myself safe? How do I manage this situation? And that's a really good start to think about that, and really acknowledge that people are often doing a whole lot of things to keep themselves safe within a relationship in really often tricky circumstances. The second thing we look at is pretty much like who someone's supports are and how they might be able to help. Where I think this becomes tricky in the wake of COVID and the infection control measures is that perhaps the supports that people once were able to access are harder to access. You know, it may be, you know, if we're in lockdown, we can't go to mum's house or a friend's house. So that's going to become, I think, trickier.
Yeah.
And the final thing is just, I guess, thinking about, you know, for people, if a situation does escalate, how they might get help, what they might do, who they might turn to. So, yeah, thinking about those things beforehand might help, so that when you're in that situation, you might remember, oh, yeah, that's right, I could do this. Yeah, in terms of a lockdown, it certainly becomes trickier because as people's windows of opportunity to get out of the house are reduced, you know, often we find if women are fleeing a domestic violence situation, they'll often use, you know, dropping kids off at school as a way to do that, or, you know, going to a regular appointment. And with those things less available now, I think it is going to be trickier. That doesn't mean, though, that there might be, you know, windows of opportunity, but people will have to really jump on them. So it could be, you know, going to the shops, which is, you know, something that we can still, or going to the pharmacy. You know, other things I thought about was, you know, if a situation is escalating at home, if possible, you know, even finding a way to take that situation, you know, out into the backyard where perhaps a neighbour might hear. and perhaps a neighbour might, if you're really wanting to get some help and maybe have the police attend, and you're not able to access a phone to be able to call themselves because of the situation. And we know that that's pretty common. Often women will say, you know, in an incident that their partners might take their phone or smash their phone or something like that. So it can be harder to call. So finding a way, you know, if you take it onto the street where, you know, where someone else might hear, could be a little window of opportunity. I mean, it really depends. It really depends on people's situations, so it's hard to advise.
It is a tough thought to even navigate, you know, let alone being in the situation itself. So, Kelly, I know that when a lot of people think about abuse, they think of physical abuse. And they think, you know, they're the only times maybe when people might need assistance. But what about, you know, if people are experiencing maybe different kinds of abuse? So I'm aware that there are all kinds of different, you know, types of abuse, but maybe if you could speak to that a bit, that would be great.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. People can get help even if they're not experiencing physical abuse. So we would see domestic and family violence as a range of tactics that someone uses to gain and maintain power and control within a relationship. So yes, that can be physical abuse, but it can also be emotional abuse, social abuse and isolation, financial control, spiritual abuse, sexual abuse, people using technology, stalking. People can get help even if it's not physical abuse. And it's interesting, one of the things I find even when I'm talking with people is sometimes they'll say, oh, no, there's no physical abuse, like my partner doesn't physically hurt me. But then when we're talking and I'm asking them questions about what's happening in their life, they might say things like, oh, well, yeah, we were, you know, arguing, my partner was yelling at me, you know, he grabbed my arm, you know, he pushed me down, you know, he held me against the wall, you know, and all these things are actually physical assault. But again, I think there's even myths around physical abuse, that people think physical abuse is only punching in the face with a black eye, and that if people don't have that black eye or those bruises, they think they're not experiencing physical abuse. But we would see it much broader than that.
Yeah, and I can speak to that in the sense that, you know, I was experiencing emotional abuse, and I wasn't acknowledging that it was abuse. I didn't think it was. At that time, you know, point in time.
Yeah.
So I totally understand where you're coming in, and then it took me to actually go and see a counsellor for them to point out to me what was going on.
Yeah, and that's really common. It can be really confusing, because I think people do have this idea that domestic and family violence is, just physical abuse and punching. And so if your situation doesn't look like that, you might feel scared and worried and bad and not knowing what to do, but you might not identify that as domestic violence. Often people might say, oh, I'm having relationship issues, or I don't know what's going on, or feel like somehow that it's their fault, that if only I did this, then my relationship would be better. But, you know, as we kind of stressed earlier, it's certainly not people's fault. And that domestic and family violence is something really different to a relationship issue where both people feel like they've got control. So some of the things that we get people to ask themselves is, you know, well, do you feel safe to kind of share your opinion? Or what happens if you say something different to what your partner wants you to do, or do something different to what your partner wants you to do? And that's where we can draw out some of those, more of those dynamics where people kind of can talk about, well, I actually feel scared to disagree with my partner, or, you know, the way my partner talks to me makes me feel really bad about myself. You know, and that's not respect. And so, we look at those things as well.
Cool. Yeah, that's a very important point to make, I think. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
So you mentioned police and other resources. So maybe, even though, yes, we might be in a lockdown situation, are there resources still available to us this time? Obviously there's still the emergency services, but what about anything else,
Yeah, absolutely. So Women's Safety Services, which is the main kind of specialist domestic violence service in South Australia, we are deemed an essential service and that we will remain open. So people can be really reassured that even if other services are closed down, even if there's a lockdown, our service will still be available for people to contact and to get help. There's two main services that people really need to remember, and they're the best access point to getting specialist help. The first is 1-800-RESPECT. That is our national helpline for domestic and family violence and sexual assault, and that's a 24-hour line. It's a free call. People can call any time of the day, and anyone can call. So women can call, men can call, friends and family can call. If you've got any sort of question or you want to talk something through related to domestic and family violence or sexual assault, call that line. You'll speak first with what they call a first responder, and then you're likely to be put through to a trauma counsellor, so a specialist counsellor who can have a chat with you. The great thing about that service is that you can remain anonymous if you want, but you can also give your details for if you want to call again. But it's such an amazing resource in Australia that at any time, anyone in Australia can talk with a specialist trauma counsellor. Like, how amazing. So I really plug that service. And in terms of a lockdown situation, maybe there is a little window, perhaps someone's partner is asleep and you could maybe go into the bathroom and, call that service and have a chat. The other service I also really wanted to highlight was the Domestic Violence Crisis Line, and that's our South Australian state-based service, and that's there to help people in crisis, or if their safety is currently at risk, they can call up that service and get the help they need. So I thought if people were interested, I might just talk through a little bit about what to expect if they were to call.
Please do. That'd be awesome, yes.
Yeah, because I think people, there's a lot of myths around about kind of seeking help and about domestic violence shelters. One of the biggest myths I think people have with domestic violence shelters is this idea that, it's rows of bunk beds and, that everyone's in together sharing, and that's just not the case. So firstly, if you called up a domestic violence specialist service, the first thing people could expect is to be listened to be believed, to have their story heard, and to not be judged. So that's one thing you will get if you call the service. The second thing is you might find that the person you speak to will ask you a lot of questions, so they might ask some detailed questions about your situation. And that's not because our workers are like nosy or because they want to kind of traumatise you. It's because it's really important that we find out as much as possible what's going on, so we can kind of assess the situation and get you the best help possible. So please know if people are asking a lot of kind of detailed questions, it's because we really want to help you and really want to get you the right support. The third thing people can expect is to have their kind of options explained to them. So we would talk to them about all the various help and options available, give as much information as possible. And one of the myths I really want to break is this idea that if you ring up a domestic violence service that we're going to tell you, you must leave your partner. And that's not the case. So what we'll do is listen to your story, give you some options, and we'll support your choices. So, and then whatever choice you make, we'll, help you think about your safety in that choice, whether it's remaining in the relationship, whether it's choosing to separate, whether it's seeking some extra help, whatever. We're there to support you. So we're not there to take your control away. We're there to kind of help you gain control back of your life.
So let's go with the example of the 1-800-RESPECT number being the national number. So for instance, in a lockdown situation, if someone was to call that number, if the person on the other end of the phone, deemed them to be at risk, would they necessarily call emergency services for them, or how does that work? Forgive me, because I don't know. I'm very lucky. I never had to use a service like this.
Yeah. If there was an immediate risk, like if someone called up and said, I think my partner's gonna kill me or really seriously hurt me, I'm locked in my bathroom, I don't know what to do, then the person on the other end would call the police. Even if the person said, I don't want you to call the police, we would still do that because it's a duty of care. But that would be if there was an immediate threat to someone's safety. But if someone called up and was just talking about their situation, we wouldn't necessarily call the police unless the person wanted you to.
Right.
Yeah, so it really depends on the situation. But if there's an immediate threat to safety, then yes. Otherwise, we would talk with people through their options. We'd certainly talk about a police response. And that, if you're being physically hurt in the relationship or your life is threatened or being stalked or sexually assaulted, these are all crimes.
Yeah.
So people have a right to report them to the police.
So then in that case, so what if it wasn't necessarily an emergency situation? However, it was serious enough for, I hate this word victim, but at the moment that's what we need to refer to them as. If the victim has decided that they are at the stage where they need to leave, even in a lockdown situation, are you aware if that would still be possible or not? Would there be someone available to come and help them get out of that situation?
Yeah. So one thing we can really reassure people is that domestic violence services are really, really good at sorting out practical issues and things that get in the way of people fleeing. We do that all the time. Like, that's our job. And in this environment at the moment with COVID and the infection control measures, it's trickier. Like, there's no denying that it's trickier, but we will talk with the person on the phone, listen to their situation and find a way through. We can really, promise that we'll kind of work it out. Sometimes though, it might mean that police have to attend, if there was a situation of high risk, to help get that person out. I can't say exactly what would happen because it's different for everyone's circumstances, but people really need to be reassured that it can feel really impossible, but if people are seeking safe accommodation, we can work it through, to the best of our abilities, and it may not be the ideal, and I think that's where it becomes really tricky, is that sometimes we can't get an ideal outcome, but we will work to get the best outcome, and the best outcome is around focusing on safety. So that's our job, is to prioritise people's safety as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think probably a really big thing, takeaway that I'm getting out of this is just to remind someone in that circumstance that you are not alone. You might be at home in that situation, but you're still not alone. There is still so much, so many resources available to them.
Yeah,
which is fantastic. So, Kelly, in that case, what about someone who, now you've briefly alluded to this, so say a neighbour or a relative or a friend of someone experiencing abuse, how can they help? And again, so as maybe not to aggravate the abuser, but to make sure that that other person is safe.
Yeah. I mean, one thing is if neighbours do hear a disturbance, if they're worried about someone, is to call the police. Like that is, I would recommend that at all times. If you're worried about someone, call the police. I think sometimes people feel worried, like, they don't want to intervene or interfere in someone's private life. But we know that with domestic and family violence, that the likelihood of kind of significant harm or, even death can happen. So it's really important that people do call the police, and then the police can come and make an assessment of that situation. So it's better to be safe than sorry. The other thing I think that neighbours or friends and family can do is, where possible, try and check in on the person that they're worried about. Of course, that can be trickier in these times, but whether it's a check-in via technology, and, you can do that in safe ways. Like, I think with this whole situation that we're in, using the kind of guise of, how are you doing in isolation? Like, we're all in this together. Like, you could use that as a bit of a kind of cover story to be checking in with people. The other thing friends and family can do is, if they don't know what to do, then they can call 1-800-RESPECT and get some, advice from like trained specialists who can just point them in the right direction of what to do in relation to that specific circumstance.
Excellent. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I actually read something the other day in regards to maybe a family member ringing to check up on the person. Is it a good idea, do you think, to maybe have a code word or a safety word?
We talk with our families a lot around that as one option in safety planning. Having a code word that you can say if you're having the conversation with a friend or family that appears really kind of benign, but lets that person know, yes, I need some help. And then hopefully with that code word goes some planning around, well, if I say this code word, what do we do? So that other person would know the code word means call the police, or the code word means, come over and come get me. Yeah.
Fantastic. That is that's really important information that you have shared with us. And so there's 1-800-RESPECT. Are you now, and obviously you are the South Australian, Women's Safety Services SA.
Yeah.
Are you aware of any other state services, or would you just immediately direct people to 1-800-RESPECT?
Either 1-800-RESPECT or the Domestic Violence Crisis Line. They're the two services to remember. With the Domestic Violence Crisis Line, with both services, they will then refer people to maybe local services. Depending on what the person needs, they'll refer out. So both those services will do that. But in every area, so in the metro area and also in regional areas, in country areas, there is a specialist domestic violence service. No matter where you live, there is a specialist service that people can contact. But to do that, probably it's easy to go through that kind of one of those central lines, and then they can have a listen to your situation and then work out what's the best support from there. But help is definitely available if people need it. And services will go at the pace of the person that is calling. So, for some people, they might just call up because they just want to kind of test things out, find out a bit of information. Absolutely fine. Sometimes people call up in a crisis. That's absolutely fine too. No matter what, give us a call, and then even if we're not the right service, then we can, direct you to who might be better to support them.
Excellent, fantastic. So again, just to reiterate, to say that no matter where you are in Australia, or the world for that matter, you are not alone, that there is help available to you in that situation. So thank you very much today, Kelly, for coming on again. And again, at such short notice, I do appreciate it. I will make sure that all those links to those services you have put up and all the phone numbers are available when this episode goes live. And hopefully it's easy access, and, we just pray that people stay, as safe as possible, as safe as they can.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ali.